The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Café. This is the United Podcast Network.
And welcome to the Writer's Block Podcast NH. I'm Deborah Monk, empowering you to find your creative voice. And today we're continuing our series of the 10 most common writing mistakes with Barb Wallace. Barbara Wallace is the author of nearly 24 romance and mystery novels. She sold her first book in 2009 and has gone on to sell nearly 1 million books in 13 countries. Her books have been honored by the Booksellers Best Award, the New England Reader's Choice Awards, and the Romantic Times Book Awards. So welcome back, Barb. Thank you for coming.
Oh, it's nice to be back.
So today we're covering a third writing mistake that writers, both inexperienced and experienced writers, make, which is character derailment. What do we mean by that, Barb?
Character derailment is when a character suddenly does something that they doesn't make sense. That they're completely out of character. It gives in books, another way to put it is you have the heroine who's too stupid to live because she does.
Oh, are we talking about men or your book?
Well, it's a big romance phrase, but you will have a character who will do something stupid, and you're like, why the heck would they do that? A normal person wouldn't. And it's because it's either the scene needs conflict, so the author decides, hey, I'm going to have her do this because it'll make for a conflict in that scene, or I'll have her argue a point that she would never argue in a million years because I need to have them arguing about something now.
Right.
Or they need to move to the external plot along, and that's where a lot of times you get the too stupid to live comment, because they'll suddenly go into the super cautious, practical, intelligent woman will suddenly say, you know what? I will go into that shed alone at dark with the serial killer missing because what the heck?
Right.
What could happen? That sort of thing. But because you need her to get caught, you need her to get into the shed, so you need her to suddenly lose her intelligence.
Yep.
Or the character's just not developed, so you have them going all over the place.
Right. So I think that's I think that one of the things that you said that makes a lot of sense is we think that every scene needs conflict. And so,
every scene should have some kind of conflict.
Right. But I think the writer tends to force it.
Yes.
And so if there isn't natural conflict in the scene, that's the problem. Not really you're not going to fix it by just adding some fake conflict.
Exactly.
And I think that a lot of times, one of my favorite kinds of stories is taking, what was that movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jamie Lee Curtis where he was...
Oh, True Confessions.
Yes.
True Lies.
True Lies. Yes.
That's it.
Loved that movie. I love movies and books where a normal person, like who's living a regular life, kind of gets pulled into this fantastical life. Mm-hmm. And, something I thought that movie is a great example because when Jamie Lee Curtis tried to be this, fat, she tried to pretend she was this glamorous woman and she was doing that dance scene in the bedroom, but she falls. And I read somewhere that was a mistake, that she wasn't supposed to fall. But then when she literally fell, they realized, that makes the scene so much better because a regular housewife who, hasn't been living that kind of life suddenly doesn't know how to stripper pole dance around a bed.
Right.
And so I think that pulling a character into a bigger than life, a situation that doesn't suit them, but then still having some of their own natural traits come through is how you make it so much more interesting.
Right. They shouldn't suddenly know how to fire a gun, things like
that.
Right. If anyone who's ever watched soap operas,
okay,
they're famous for character derailment. You'll have this couple that has spent years building up the tension, and they'll get together, and then the character will inexplicably be drawn to someone else,
right,
or suddenly say, "I can't be committed because I have this whatever reason," and it's only just to keep them apart again.
Right.
And that's the character is so out of character. But I've read it in books too. Like they will have the character do something, like you said, for conflict. They'll suddenly start bickering about some meaningless thing. Like, well, I'm a woman and I can do this, and women can do everything. And it's like, but she logically understands the reason. You just have them arguing this point,
right, for the sake of it,
or her demanding that she go along when she has never insisted on going along before. You don't give them a reason why. You have to give them a reason why, which is why I said underdeveloped characters.
Right.
I think a lot of this goes back to pre-writing and really understanding your character, their fears, their motivations, who they are, why they do things. And so you can, when you're writing a scene, you know what your character would do personality-wise. Or if you're going to have them do something out of character, you know what situation would make them act that way.
Right. I remember one of our, as our listeners know, we're in a critique group, and on my first novel, Searching for, was it Searching? Oh, no, maybe it was the second novel, sorry, Well-Behaved Woman Coming Undone, where the daughter of the mother was an alcoholic as she was growing up. So now this adult daughter went to her bar, and her mother isn't drinking anymore, but they've been estranged. And I had a scene where she tried to get her mother to drink.
We hated that scene.
You all hated that scene, and I really loved that scene. And you all said it's too much, it's too harsh, she wouldn't do that. And I kept it in because it was really powerful. And I knew my character that well that I knew, even though none of you guys thought she would do it, I also, and I don't even know if this is true, and I'm not even asking because this is very personal, but my impression, I believed that I had a lot more experience of what it was like to have an adult alcoholic. And so I knew the underlying rage that a child has, grows up and never releases. And so for me in that scene, it just felt so real. I felt like I would do it. The difference is I did pull it back a little bit and didn't have the alcoholic quite as tempted or quite as willing to take it. And so I had...
well, then it becomes more of a test.
Right.
And that's, which I see what you were doing.
And then the daughter ended up picking the glass up and throwing it against the mirror, and the shards broke down. And I love that scene, but I really, when you have three people telling you it's too much, 99% of the time, I would completely go along with that. Mm-hmm. I would subvert my own desire of the scene when all three of you say no. But in giving it a lot of thought afterwards, I said, no, this character would do that. And I understood that none of you would write a character who would do that, but it suited mine.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, I will counter that and say that you know your character extremely well. You do have to make sure that
the reader does.
Right.
Yes.
Hints of that go along. So if they are going to do something, we need to know that that's in character.
Right.
Which goes back to last week's show with the dumping. It's not so much that you're going to dump every single detail about the character. You want to give enough information to be able to allow you to move that story along.
Exactly.
Right.
And enough glimmers of what that character is.
And that's the whole key, is those little windows into their soul.
Exactly.
Not the entire thing. We can let people fill in their own drama, but those little tiny windows.
Exactly. Yeah, Jonathan nailed it, because if the reader is smart enough to put together the clues, you just need to drop them in. So, if you're going to have a woman, one of the best examples of always of someone acting completely out of character and buying it is, would you go into a burning building?
Only if Sophie was in there.
Right.
Or maybe my dog.
But yeah, you would.
Right.
Most people would be smart enough to stay out of a burning building.
Yes.
Unless they've got a heroic complex where they believe, they're a fireman or something, and that's like, or they're an ex-military or whatever, where their instinct is save someone, or it's a mother and their child is on the third floor.
Right.
Well, then, yes, I'm going in, or I'm going to do whatever I can to get somebody to go in. I'm going to do something.
Right.
And I'm going to at least get as far as the door before the flames blow me back, whatever. But if that's the case, then you should be setting up that she's a mother. You really don't have to say much more than she's a mother.
Right.
And people will be smart enough to go, okay, she
thinks her child's in
right.
there.
But if you have Susie walking down the street and she sees a fire, and you haven't set up, if you don't say her military training kicked in,
right.
So she ran in, something like that. You don't need much, but you need to at least explain it.
Right.
Because people do act out of character, but there needs to sometimes be
a reason.
A reason. She may go to the shed if she's like, oh my God, the clock is ticking. So-and-so is going to die if I don't find this man. I'll have to go to the shed, even though I know there's a serial killer out there.
It was always in the shed.
So
it was always in the basement.
How much does mapping this character help somebody not derail them? Should they be making notes about who this person is, and maybe find 5 or 6 things that you're going to open those windows up on?
Yeah. I think so.
Well, and Barb said a word, pre-writing. And I made a note. I want to go back. What do you mean by that?
Before you write your book or before you write your story, you should have an idea a really good idea of who your main characters are.
And I believe you do that. How do you do that?
Well, I do mine by doing psychological profiles. Like I know people who will do theirs where they want to know who they went to school and what they did as a kid and all that. To me, I want to know what their biggest fears are, what their biggest challenges are, what they that thing that they need to overcome. So I do a lot of psychological profiles. My friend Farah Roshan, who's a multi-award-winning author, she likes to do personality graphs, like
the Myers-Briggs.
The Myers-Briggs. Denise did the Myers-Briggs one. She does a lot of those. Our friend Denise, who's in our critique group. There's enneagrams, so the kind of personality types. Like and you would figure out like, okay, he's a heroic personality type. This means he would do this, he would do that, do this. There are other people doing by astrology, but you want to sit down and really know your character's internal motivations and internal self, not just their eye color and their hair and where they grew up. And so that's where the pre-writing comes in, is really understanding her background. Like the fact that your character grew up in an alcoholic house and you know everything that happened in that house to her. And we go back to like with info dumping and the iceberg.
Right.
That we talked about the last time. All that iceberg stuff will come into play because it shapes how your character is going to behave.
Right.
So while you may not tell the reader this stuff, it will help your character stay in character. And people will not be like, oh, why would she do that? So...
Right. With that character, I didn't give a lot of scenes about what it was like growing up with an alcoholic mother. I gave one.
Right.
I just chose one memory that she chose, and that kind of gave a sample. That gave a sense of, okay, what her growing up childhood was like.
Right.
So do you actually write these details out about your characters before you start the book?
Oh, I do. I have a notebook and I sit and write long.
And see, I know the answer to that. I've seen the notebook. Oh,
and it's just filled with little details and like stories about herself.
And to me, I look at it and it's just so intimidating. I just feel like
but it
you're
helps
so good.
You because one of the things is you want your character to act consistently. One of the biggest times you see derailment is or a character's underdeveloped is if there's someone different in every scene.
Oh, if they act like someone different in every scene,
right?
You mean that one person.
If you establish her in scene A that she's going to be the straight-laced accountant, do not have scene B where she's chugging back gin and tonics and tossing her underwear on the stage because it felt so good to let loose.
Right.
When you've seen, you need to stay consistent. She might, if you
unless
have her,
that's her,
right?
And you've
but
got
if
to make
she's straight-laced in the front and arguing with the guy about noise and likes everything just so, then the next chapter she's not going to cut that. Her idea of cutting loose is not going to be throwing her underwear up.
Right.
It's going to be untying her tie and having a glass of Chardonnay.
Yes.
So
unless her briefcase, when she opens it at the office, we see the lace thong almost fall, and she has to push it back in, so we get a hint of something to come.
Exactly.
Right.
So knowing your but even then, knowing your character inside and out helps you make them consistent. So they're cool as a cucumber one scene. They should be cool as a cucumber in every scene until you come up with some reason why they have to lose it. Maybe it would crack if it was their child. Like they're fine until their child gets kidnapped, and then it's like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I can't. But even then, they should rally and get back to cool cucumber.
Right.
So all the pre-writing does is help you keep your character consistent. And that's a big thing in our critique group. We go back and forth with, would they do that?
Yes.
And we always go with the scenes with that.
And the funny part is sometimes, especially you and Denise, Nina will write something and the two of you, you'll say she wouldn't do it or would do it. And Denise will say the opposite. And then you'll both pull facts that Nina's written. And I watch Nina just sit back and kind of like she's watching a tennis game. And then the voice of reason is never me, of course, but there's somehow we all come up with a voice of reason of how we can make it work, but what needs to be added or taken out.
Right, and that's usually the author's job. The author, we can give our own psychoanalysis, but the author knows their character the best. So my answer for character derailment is pre-writing and making sure in every scene your character is staying true to the personality that you assigned them at the beginning.
Oh.
And if you want them to have some kind of strain, if they're hiding a personality trait, then you better drop hints all along. Like the kindly old lady is the killer. There needs to at least be a couple hints, like she chops things very quickly or something.
She's an expert with the kitchen knife.
Well, I just finished a book where the killer comes. It's a kind of a you find out who the killer is, but she's not necessarily who you suspect is the killer for quite a bit of the book. So you have to drop little clues.
Is this your new book?
Yeah.
Oh, and when is that due?
I'm not sure. It'll be out sometime late in the end of the year.
Okay, this is the second in the Sadie's McIntyre series?
Yes.
Oh, good. Well, I'll look forward to that.
But again, so drop clues in, and I know, but it's because I know what she's doing off stage. So again, that's the pre-writing. So my answer is pre-writing and staying true to it. All
right. Well, that's the way to stay on the rails. If you want to hear this episode again or share it with a friend, send them to the UnitedPodcastNetwork.tv. That's UnitedPodcastNetwork.tv. You can find this podcast and the vodcast video on demand in case you want to watch it. Find this episode and all previous episodes on the UnitedPodcastNetwork.tv, and please subscribe.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Café, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.